two of these sessions happening, the one today, and then May 6th is our next one. And so before we get started, I just wanted to say a couple words. Number one, you'll notice, well, number one, this is the first time I've done a webinar like this, so this is kind of new to me. Number two, you'll notice the picture on our screen is two of our students. There are posters that you may have seen in town, of students doing what they need to do to be safe. We have what we call here the 3 W's: wearing your mask, washing or sanitizing your hands, and watching your distance. And I had identified a number of students for the possibility to go to the high school and do these posters that we were spreading around town on the MDI promise, which was, doing what you can do to be safe. And we wanted to showcase our students doing that. So there's a 7th grader and an 8th grader there. And those posters are in our school, and then, they're out and about as well, and you probably have seen them driving around. So I just wanted to congratulate them. Also, I wanted to share, and I shared this at the school board meeting on Tuesday, how proud I am of this community, of our students, our families, and our teachers. Because I was talking to a colleague who has a friend that works in Southern Maine in a school, and they've been doing the hybrid model with elementary kids. And the conversation, it was February, and we were talking, and their colleague, they were a 2nd grade teacher, and they had only seen their kids 35 times. And that wasn't even in person, that was on a video screen. And since September 28th, we have been in school 5 days a week, following those 3 W's, that on top of the teaching and learning that has to take place. And that's a heavy lift for kids, for families, and for teachers, but you all are doing it. And I just think that's amazing. And just a recognition of the resilience of our community and of our kids and of our families and our teachers. So I before the meeting on Tuesday, I wanted to make sure that, I shared that, because it's something that I've been feeling when I hear or see the news about schools and not being able to see kids. And, so much of school is, building those relationships, and we've been able to do that. So I think that's awesome. So as we get started, there we go. I have to be on the right screen to click forward. Just some welcome and introductions, and just a couple of housekeeping things. I'm Mike Zabori, the principal of the school, and I have Mark Gauss, superintendent, and some members of the school board, and Nancy Thurlow here to talk a little bit about the school budget and other questions folks may have as we move up through to town meeting. I also wanted to share that after I go through the presentation, then folks will have an opportunity to ask questions in the chat. Please realize that the chat is going to be saved, and also if you do a private chat, those messages are saved, so just realize that. And then when we're done, Jennifer is going to ask the questions that are out there, and I'll do my best to answer them, and if somebody else around the table can answer those, we'll do that. And if I don't have an answer right now, then I'll write that down and make sure I get it to you at the next session that we have. Or if you identify who you are, then I can get it to you directly. We are going to end at 7 o'clock because we want to go and have dinner. So first thing is I wanted to give some basic facts about Trenton Elementary, and I wanted to start with our student populations, because the reason the school is here is for our students. And looking back, you can see the numbers starting in 2009 with about 122 students up to 2020, and there had been a steady increase over the years, which matches the report that was done. It was actually last year or the year before, and looking at student population in our area, in the two communities within our district that we're going to show growth were Trenton and Tremont. Last year we had a pandemic and there was a lot of shifting and movement. And actually that's a national phenomenon in terms of the number of students in public education is shifting, whether they've moved to different towns or homeschooling because they weren't sure what school was going to look like. And so when you look at our 2020 population, you're looking at 125 kids, and that's pre-K through 8. And at some of our earlier board members, I sort of talked about, right now, we had a smaller pre-K population because a lot of those parents, really needed support for their kids in ways where if school may be in or may be out, and at the point where they needed to make that decision, it wasn't sure, they chose, something else. And so, that happened sort of across grade levels. So that's why there's sort of that dip. I have the sense of we're going to be getting a lot of our kids back, so those numbers will go back up. In terms of high school, right now we have 66 kids. 49 of them are at Mount Desert Island High School, 15 are at Ellsworth High School, 2 are in a virtual setting. We don't pay for those 2, we pay for those 2, the schools that are going to both MDI and EHS. So our total pre-K 12 population is 191. I think last year we were up over 200. Some basic facts about the high school enrollment. So you could see what it looks like for 9, and this is for both total, both together combined, Ellsworth High School and Mount Desert Island High School. That number floating somewhere in the 60s, potentially rising. Class size has been around 15 with some bulges in some areas and some that are a little bit smaller, but continually moving a decent number of kids through the process, and you can see that number hovering around 66 for next year. And when we budget for that, unlike other schools within our district, we have to budget separately for our 9-12 students. And over the years, figuring out kids who are moving here, there's always that contingency factor. So you always want to have a few more students that you're added to that population that you're projecting. With superintendent's agreements, you need to keep track of those numbers so you know which kids might be at a different school for whatever family reason, and then eventually you'll be scooping them up because they live here in town, and so they would be going to school to Ellsworth or MDI or potentially another school in the area. And you could see the current tuition cost is around $11,000 is what we charge for when we do our budgeting. Some basics about the numbers of our teachers. And that I have numbers back to 2009. And, for the most part, our teacher numbers have pretty much stayed the same, small increases. Those small increases sort of expand opportunities for students. For example, for a while, our PE teacher was 80%, and we increased that to 100% a number of years back, and that provided more PE classes for our K2 students so that they would have PE 3 times a year. We upped our world language from 25% to 50% to provide more access to world language. And we know that research sort of talks about the fact that learning a second language is really good for our brains and sort of primes us to do, even more. And the main learning results suggest that schools, elementary schools, provide a second language. Foreign language a school may have, because any language sort of helps build those neurons to pick up another language separately once you get to high school. We added, as you can see, I sort of put pre-K as separate because we share that cost with Down East community partners. And so it's important to recognize that we have that partnership, and that just provides another extra area of growth for our kids starting early. And thinking about the budget going forward for 2021, the changes is making our nurse full-time, and making our tech person full-time. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that part of the position, that's going to be grant funded. Our number of ed techs. One of the things that's I think is really important to recognize, and I think it bears out when you look at across the years and what we have done, is that we've been very diligent in how we use our ed techs as our needs have increased over the years. And there's sort of been virtually no change. And actually, a couple of years ago, I decided to remove one position just because of the budgetary issues that we were facing and trying to be as prudent as possible with the town's money. And it's, as you can see again with the pre-K, I added those numbers there because those are cost sharing that we do with Down East Community Partners. Our staff and special ed staff work really hard at managing their ed techs and making sure they're in the right places to serve the kids' needs. I'm pretty proud of the fact that they do a really good job of that. And we're able to keep those numbers flat over the years. Now, a little bit about our budget history. And at the top, I have listed our total budget amount that we see at town meeting going back to 14-15 and all the way up to our proposed budget. And when you look at that, our budget has increased 4% a year over 7 years. But over that time, there's about $1 million in increase. And that nearly half of that is due to special education costs. Trenton had experienced a similar increase over a 6-year period from 2000 to 2006. There was a $1 million increase. And then if you look at state numbers for Trenton in terms of expenditures from 2009 to now, that's 13 years before we sort of had another $1 million increase. But the majority of that has happened recently. And that has been driven a lot by special education costs. And then below that line, there is the difference, which means budget to budget. So when you look back, starting at 15-16, our budget was actually lower than the previous years, and we were able to keep that up for a couple of years in doing some savings. And then you can look over the years at where those increases are and how that can be reflected in some of those special education costs. But we've worked really hard to sort of keep it as possible. Yep.
Mike, just to point out, in the 16, 17, 15, 16 year, I think that reflects use of carry forward by the select board.
Yep.
And that's important to point out because the recommendation for the use of carry forward would have showed a trend very different in those years. And I think that's important for the community to know. And we could put other budgets of other AOS member schools up to reflect that. And I think Nancy, who was on this call, could probably concur that you see those numbers, but it's important to really drill back and provide context to know how those numbers were arrived. And they were arrived at because of, I think, how the use of carry forward was deployed by the select board. And that's not how the school committee, at least as I recall, had recommended. They had recommended that be spread out over a number of years.
Yes, in each of those situations, the school board tried to manage the increase a little bit more slower over time. Below that line is our state subsidy. And state subsidy is made up of free and reduced counts and special education expenditures. Currently, our free and reduced count this year was 32%. The state cutoff is 46% to receive the economically disadvantaged funds. That's why the number was much lower than what we were anticipating, which goes to the point is every year we send out the free and reduced form for people to fill out. And usually there's a letter with that, and there might be an email, there might be something in the newsletter that talks about the importance of filling it out, regardless of whether you feel you might meet that criteria. The whole idea is to provide as many numbers as possible to be able to see if we meet the criteria, because that, as you can tell, when we don't hit that number, we not only lose state subsidy, but there's other grants and other pieces, the monies that are available to us that were not available to us because we're not hitting that number. I do want to point out that in the 18-19 year, there was an added 116,000 that was for the added special ed costs. It was called the hardship funds, that because we had someone come in that was unbudgeted, that's how you were able to get hardship funds. If you already know about it at the budget process and you know your costs are going to be high, you can't apply for those funds. That's for if someone comes into your community and you have to absorb that cost. But it's really important for folks to make sure that when they get those forms, they fill them out regardless. It would be really important. Special education expenditures below that, that has increased about 100% over 7 years. And that happens in the town that I live in. They had experienced a period of time where those costs were high. In Trenton's past, they had experienced that. You know, when you look at our overall budget, you could see where a large amount of our costs come from. And it's important to try to find ways to manage those. And I'll sort of talk about that later on as we get towards the end of the presentation. And then the last line I put in there is in system administration. And I added that line because there had been a lot of talk about the cost of being in the AOS and you know, whether those costs were too high, and if we were to do something different, what that would look like. And you know, the numbers that are there are actual expenditures from the state numbers. And back when the school was in Union 92 in the 08-09 school year, Trenton paid $72,947 for system administration. Currently, in Lemoyne's 2021 budget, as a comparison, they pay $134,000. You know, being in the AOS over the last 6 years of the budget numbers that I have there, that was a 5% increase over 6 years, or just 0.8%. And I think the important thing that I recognize of being part of the district is the services that we receive, you know, whether that's special education or curriculum. And that's really an important piece to recognize when we think about costs.
Michael, could I just add one piece?
Yeah.
Because I think it's important to really emphasize this. If the claim is that could Trenton do better by leaving, clearly the cost, the system administration costs alone, if you look at the data, it's pretty clear. The math is really clear that Trenton significantly benefits from being a part of the AOS as much as the AOS benefits from having Trenton be a part of it, and that there really would be no savings. Actually, there would be a cost to leaving the AOS. And that the other piece is that these special education costs that, I agree, the numbers don't lie, they've increased by over 100%, are federally and state mandated. They're not costs that anybody locally or within a school district can control. So I think those are two really important points that stand out in this graph. Thank you.
Yeah. And so I wanted to talk about our current budget proposal. And so usually at the top of the budget, when you see that, I sort of listed the top, you know, 3 areas, and then I have sort of budget, which you see at the end of our budget. And our carryover, like I said, our anticipated number is, you know, a little over 500,000. We're proposing to use 400 of that and to hold on to 100,000 for next year, to try to make sure that you know we're taking care of the bottom line. So And Nancy could talk a little bit more about that. And there might be some questions later on. Town appropriation, the difference there is $60,000 from last year to this year with a 1.69% increase, and that increase per 100,000 is $19.83. And that includes having the nurse at 100% in the budget. State subsidy, you can see that really, does affect us. We lost a little over $100,000, and so that plays a big role in as we're doing the budget. And I wanted to share that, and you'll see on the next slide, so what we did as a school board when we found out that we were losing $100,000 of what we had early anticipated. I know that there has been some chat about saving money, and I just want to sort of break down some of the things that we did to do that in our budget for this coming year. And then budget to budget, that difference is 2.3%. The budget details. Now, in response to the state subsidy shortfall, we went back and I was able to find $72,000 in cuts that came from a variety of cost centers. And I listed those there from the regular K-12 education. Part of that was tuition savings in the terms of having a lower cost of tuition for the high school, special education, co-curricular savings, summer school, which we are grant funded for that this year, as we have been for the last couple of years. So I have been able to pull that out of the budget. Guidance, improvement to instruction, library, technology, the principal line, transportation, and food service. And all together, we were able to map those savings. Some of the additions and deletions that are in the overall budget, what is in there is asymptomatic testing for next year, because we're not sure what next year is going to bring. And I think we have found that the testing that we did this year that was funded through the hospital and folks on the island sort of really helped out, helping us keep tabs on the virus within our schools. Also, like I said, there's a lower 9-12 tuition rate. We saved some money in salaries for ed techs and professional services savings. And what that is in some of our students that are out in out of district placement, those folks can apply for some main care services, so that lessened some of the amounts that we had to pay. And then, like I said, is the addition of our nurse. The pre-K is now included within the budget line, and the technology, which is going from 60% to a full-time position, that is going to be partially funded by the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds. And then what the school board did is we asked to separately have warrant articles for the library roof repair, which is about $60,000. And you can see we would add $19.56 to valuation. And then the 3.5, not necessarily roof repair, that would be if we want to put panels on that part of the roof, it would be just to sort of start with a clean slate before you start adding things on top of the roof. That is $20,000, and that would be a $6.52 increase to $100,000 valuation. And so the question about how you manage costs, and healthcare is not only here in Trenton, in the state of Maine, or national, but I think folks within the district have done several things to sort of help manage healthcare costs. One of the first was the adjustment of percentage of healthcare and cost sharing with the 80-18%. And then the next step was district consolidation to a single group rating for all schools. That result has been a 0% increase for I think we've been doing it for 4 years now. And 3 of those 4 years have been 0%. And there have been times where we have been able to come back on the town floor and provide some monies back to be able to offset the school budget. This year, the recommendation coming from the school board is of the 8% that we had put in the budget that we'll hold on to 4% just because of unknown situations and changes in plans and what might be happening. And so that's what the school board is recommending. Now, where that 0% comes from, there's been a focus on health and wellness, and it's pretty clear overall, if you're providing opportunities and education for staff to be healthy and working with them in a variety of areas, that pays dividends. They're going to the doctors less. And so that has been a focus over the last couple of years. We also did a switch to the standard 1000 plan. And so that lowered cost a little bit. And then we had the addition of the health reimbursement account. And Mark, I don't know if you want to share a little bit about how that plays into
Well,
providing savings.
I would, Mike, I think that slide says it all. You've done a nice job articulating what we've done. And the numbers are the numbers. I'd stack those numbers up against virtually every public school system in the state. Healthcare is tough for any entity, public or private, but it's part of our total compensation package. Hats off to our teachers and staff who've worked with us to collaborate on these steps. But there are a lot of districts across the state that are looking at the things that we've been able to accomplish to better manage healthcare costs. And I just, I'm really proud that some of the things that we've done are paying dividends, but more importantly, it's the right thing to do for our employees. So, I think you've done a really nice job pointing that out, Mike. I would just close by saying this: healthcare or this benefit isn't a mandate. This is part of our collective bargaining process. It's not something we just say take it or leave it. We work, we collaborate, and that is how the system we're in works. It's so I think that's 80% of our costs, between 70 to 80% of our costs in public education we're people. It's salaries and benefits and insurances. So I think this really reflects the school committee being good stewards, being innovative, and trying to rein in costs. And they should be commended for that.
Thank you, Mark. Managing special ed costs. As I had stated earlier, it would seem silly to, point out that, there are increases in special ed costs and not take a look at how best to manage those. And I think, on the top of that list is the addition of a pre-K to your core program. Several economists have pointed out that there are clear savings over the years if you have a pre-K, and I know that as I look at kids who have moved through and some that may have struggled in their pre-K years and got services early on, and then add kindergarten in a much better place, and that would lead to fewer kids being identified for special education. That's the key there. The managing of ed tech schedules efficiently to cover identified needs again, but that goes to the staff that are here and how they do that. I think that's really important. They do, a great job of making that happen. And then the idea of focusing on quality, not quantity, in hiring decisions. Last year, we had, some more folks coming to school and needed to make a decision of how we were to manage that. And by hiring another special ed teacher, that actually saved us money to be able to meet needs of the students that we have. So that was really important. And folks should know that the district is exploring regional programming. Principals have met multiple times this year around a life skills program and a K-4 behavior program. And those discussions are still in the works on what that might look like as possible savings. And then as the SEOC is part of their recommendations, they sort of talked about main care billing, and in the school board's response, we looked at that, and maybe as a school, that does not make sense in terms of how much we might get. I think Tom did a really good job of taking a look at the total budget that Bangor gets, and then what they receive and what they bill, and how that would relate to the size of our budget. But when we look at it as a district, especially if we're looking at programming for life skills and K-4 behavior, that might be something that we take a look at within that exploration. So it's definitely an idea, and appreciate the SCOC putting that out there and for us to take a look at it.
Mike, just a quick one. You mentioned this, but the return on investment, dollar for dollar on pre-K across the board is about 7 to 1. It really is probably the biggest bang for the buck you can put into public education to ensure that kids will be on a good, solid foundation to progress. And as you mentioned, Mike, it really mitigates further costs down the road. So that's commendable, and that's something Trenton's been a leader in, and we're looking to expand in our other AOS communities.
And so I think that brings us to the end. And so I wanted to have an opportunity to be able to answer questions that might be out there, and Jennifer has been taking a look at those, but I'm gonna have to figure out, okay, stop the share.
You ready for the first question? When is the AOS going to seriously look into special ed issues? Why can't we create a special education department within the district? Kids' Piece is ridiculously expensive and fleecing our communities.
I think the answer to that question is what I had in that last slide, is that we are exploring both a life skills and a K-4 behavior program as a district. And so that's something that we are actively working on right now.
Okay.
And I would just add, Jennifer, not only are we working on it within our district, but regionally with other Hancock County superintendents as well.
Nice. Second question, are the numbers that you put up here on display, are they going to be available for people to actually have themselves to look
Yes.
over?
Those numbers are similar to, and what I could do is put those in a different format and make them available for people, and folks can email me. Oftentimes I'll take those. If you remember, I think it was, well, each year I put together the cost center sheet for the town meeting and have those, a bunch of numbers available. So I'll make all of that available to folks.
That's all the questions I have. Anybody else want to type in any questions on what you just heard from Mike? I'm not getting anybody typing anything. Oh, wait. Somebody thanked you, Mr. Z. Great work.
My pleasure. And maybe for future, since this was the first time sort of doing this, this way, Jennifer and I will probably talk and think about at the next one, if it makes sense to do a raising of a hand and then people can talk rather than type. It was unclear how many people would show up, and trying to think about how to manage on the computer, how to do that and be able to answer questions.
Mike?
And everybody hear things, we might take a look at that.
Michael, any possibility, if the weather looks good, that we might even try to hold it in person outside, or maybe an evening where we could even feature some of the work of the kids, or just in the parking lot, set up some chairs, physically distanced, but I just want to throw that out there as the weather warms.
No, it's a great idea, Mark, and I think that's something that we could take a look at and try. Jennifer and I both sort of thought about, if this went well, maybe we could think about doing it differently. That's a great idea. I didn't think about that. So It's in my notes.
Sorry to create work for you, Michael.
No, I would rather see people.
And people have my email address. If they have questions that, they're trying to absorb this, they want to send it to me via email so that maybe by the next meeting that we have in May, we'll have the answers for, or at least it could be read then. I have no problem, collecting that as well if people, aren't sure what questions to ask right now.
And Jennifer, I just want to add, and Nancy, don't kick me. Oh, she can't because she's in a different place, but we're happy to answer questions by anyone at any time. If there's any information we can provide or anybody has any questions for our office, please reach out.
All right. Well, I thank all the folks who showed up, and we'll be here again on May 6th. And if the weather is lovely, I saw someone had said it's a little chilly tonight, but by May 6th, I'm ready for 60s at 6. All right.
Nice job, Michael.
Well, thank you all for showing up. And again, if anybody has any questions, folks can email me and I'll put together what I usually do for a town meeting, but I'll have that ahead of time made up so it's not so many slides, a little easier to read.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Nancy. And I guess Josh is the one who turns us all off.
Yeah, if you're ready, I'll end the meeting.
Yep, it looks